Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Creating Mank in Dolby Vision. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You have joined the presentation listening using your computer speaker system by default. If you prefer to join over the telephone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Today's webinar is being recorded and you'll receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view the recording. And now I'd like to introduce Tom Graham, Head of Dolby Vision Content Enablement.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for taking the time to join us today. We're excited to get started. And for this opening portion, we have a pre-recorded video interview. And the benefit of doing that was we could, refer to the clips that we were talking to and have some really good B-roll. And we're super excited to be joined by our guests today and super grateful to Netflix for the content. So while you're watching the pre-recorded video, please type your questions in the chat. We'll try to get to everybody's questions. We want to hear from you. Tell us where you're at, say hello, all those sorts of good things. And at the end, we'll switch to live Q&A with our guests. And today, unfortunately, we could not be joined by Erik Messerschmidt, the DP, but we do have the great Eric Weidt, colorist, and co-producer Peter Mavromates live. So, all right, let's kick over and start the recording. All right, welcome everybody to our Dolby Vision webinar on the absolutely amazing movie Mank, and we're so excited to be joined by the crew, who's really sort of responsible for leading the overall image and look. And I'll let everybody introduce themselves, Peter, Eric, and Eric, starting with you, Peter.
All right, I'm Peter Mavromates. I'm co-producer on Mank, and I lead up all of the producing for post and for VFX on David's projects.
I'm Erik Messerschmidt, and I was the director of photography on Mank.
And I'm Eric Weidt, and I was the colorist, or as I like to say, the absence of colorist, because it's a black and white movie for those who haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's an absolutely fantastic movie, and I want you to know I tried to wear my Mank tie very short, like Mank does, but I just couldn't go all the way to that short. But it was such a fantastic movie, and you know we met up and did a panel at IBC a few years ago when actually people could meet together, and it was on the second season of Mindhunter, and the same group did that, and now you've moved on and you've created this amazing picture, Mank, that is such a different style. And I have to say, all of us involved in the world of Dolby Vision have been pining and dreaming of a black and white movie in high dynamic range, and so this absolutely delivers on every front. And I have to say, I was super excited, Eric, to see your card in the front with the high dynamic range label. Can you tell us about that?
It was a total surprise. I think I remember texting with Eric Weidt months ago now, and it was always like, oh, have you gotten the most recent? He would send us revisions. He was grading it remotely, or well, not for him, but for us, and we would get revisions, but it was never the whole movie. It was like scenes or sections or pieces or. And he said, oh, have you seen your title card yet? Have you seen the titles yet? Have you seen the titles yet? And I said, no, I haven't seen the titles yet. And then I saw it, and I was like, oh, cool. So that I didn't know anything about that. That was something that I guess, I don't know, Peter, you and Fincher worked up, or I don't know where that came from actually.
It was really between I think David and Neil Kellerhouse, who's the designer that we use. Yeah, and they went back and forth on Rent's credit for sound as well. There was he at least was contacted because he didn't like the one that we did for him, so we changed it.
So, I mean, what's beautiful about it is it's kind of got that throwback, 40s style, calling out the title and, like shot in Technicolor, or, but it's got that piece to it, and I think it's really cool. So,
Well, I was just gonna, I really think of HDR as a different format. I don't really think of it as like an added bonus, the way that it's sometimes marketed. I think of it as a different way to view movies and a different way to experience movies. In the same vein as something like filmed in Technicolor, or the 3-strip process, or Cinerama, or it is a heightened way to experience the film, and it's a different format to work in, and it's certainly a different format to photograph in as well, is my opinion. It's sort of two separate worlds. The finishing in high dynamic range versus monitoring and exposing in high dynamic range are kind of two separate conversations, in my opinion.
Cool. And I'm excited that we're here, all of us together, to talk about it, because I feel like you as a team have such a great advantage in that you've developed a process from everything from shooting, testing, on-set monitoring, all the way through dailies and color, that so many people can learn so much from. And yes, you're kind of a closed house, but there's so many great lessons that I'm excited that we're here to talk about today. Tell us, we'll start with the shooting topics, and tell us how you obviously you guys have been shooting digital for quite a long time. You're big fans of red cameras, and so how did you decide to go with the special sensor and sort of remove color from the sensor itself?
Well, initially, the three of us talked about it, and I mean, initially, I had suspected that maybe the color camera would work to our advantage, so that Eric would have the color information to work with in the grade, and I think both of us were a little bit apprehensive, actually. I don't want to speak for Eric, but at least I was like, boy, that could really come in handy, and so Eric, Peter, and I, and David talked about it, and we decided that we would shoot a test, and we would compare the color camera against the black and white camera. And it wasn't really about nostalgia at all. It was like just about empirical testing. And we compared the two sensors. Well, we actually shot several color sensors, and we shot the black and white sensor. And I think we were in the theater for all of like 18 seconds before we all unanimously agreed that there was no chance we were going to shoot color. I mean, I think, Peter, you maybe even like leaned over and you're like, well, that's pretty clear. It was like very, very obvious that that was the way to go. And it just, I don't know, for me anyway, it had so much more tonal depth and range. It had this kind of silvery, tactile quality to it that the desaturated color sensor just didn't have. It looked thin, and it didn't have the same bite, and it didn't have.
I think it had less grain too, no?
What's that?
It didn't have less grain too, because there's no debayer on that sensor.
Right.
I remember the Komodo had just come out, and so you were looking for very fast cameras. I think that we were sort of on the bleeding edge. The Komodo was a little too new, and the debayering algorithms were producing a couple glitches there as well at the time.
Yeah, we needed speed because we were doing some deep focus work with with the lenses quite closed down, and it wasn't even apparent to us initially. I mean, all our initial tests were all about kind of the quality of the image, and then as it turned out, the black and white camera we felt like we could really comfortably rate at 3200 ASA, which of course was really beneficial for us in terms of the deep focus, and certainly from a budget standpoint.
And so by deep focus, you mean like in the San Simeon dinner or party where everybody's sitting there, right?
Yeah, I mean, actually, almost the entire film was shot between a T8 and T11. So, I mean, the lens is nearly closed. Uh, so it's, even at 800 ASA would have required substantial amounts of light. And, the monochrome camera was really clean at like 1600 ASA. And we looked at it and we said, God, we can push this further. And we looked at it at 3200 ASA, and it had just a little bit of digital noise in it, which looked quite a bit like film grain, which then Eric was able to enhance. So yeah, that's where we landed.
Cool. And I think that's in terms of people getting started in HDR, the amount of testing that you do is critical to having the communication between set and post production, right?
For sure. For
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Well, Eric made the choice early on to monitor in HDR, right, on set.
Mhm.
And I thought it was interesting your reasons for that, what you thought you gained from that, in terms of being able to stay a bit more open because you were visually assured by looking at an HDR monitor that, for example, the windows in the background weren't clipped. Even though you can see the histogram, you were telling me that it's more of a psychological thing that, well, if you see it, if you see that detail there, you're gonna want to protect for it less, and you're gonna resist a little bit that urge to stop down in those situations
Yeah,
and get a clean
exactly.
movie.
Exactly. And I found that as a result, I was using a lot less fill light. Like we were, I could really comfortably expose far to the right. And when I found I was monitoring an SDR, um, I was closing down early in the exposure curve. I was overprotecting the highlights. Um, and I was using more fill on the set, and then we would get into the HDR grade, and Eric would have to sort of re-equalize the curve, and it turned out I didn't need the fill, and I didn't need to protect the highlights, and I was like, so it really it created a situation where I felt like I really understood the camera, and I could really comfortably expose it, and I also think to some degree because um, I was I was effectively overexposing the camera without getting an overexposed image that we would have more color fidelity in the grade, and the sensor was, the digital negative was thicker, so to speak, and Eric would have um, more density to work with, and there was no real sacrifice, and so it completely changed the way I work for sure. And now, I mean, the movie I'm doing now is I'm monitoring in HDR, and it's a theatrical release in P3. It's not even destined for an HDR release. I mean, I'm sure we'll do a grade, but I'm monitoring in HDR anyway, just because I feel like my exposures are better.
That's what I remember you saying that in our Mindhunter talk, is that you said, it was freeing to you to have the HDR monitor on set, and that you had more confidence, and even if you were doing an SDR only movie, you'd still want to monitor that way.
Yeah, I've done it ever since. Yeah,
You need to get that movie into a Dolby Cinema
I know we should
and,
work on
and,
that,
and use
guy.
that HD. Yeah, because those are the best cinemas out there.
Yeah,
There you
for
go.
sure.
That would be great.
I'll put you in
And
touch. So.
yeah, let me hook you up. I know some people. Um, and so what monitor did you settle on for on set?
On Mindhunter and then on Mank, we did both on the Canon 2411, which is it's a field monitor. It's pretty good. It's a 600 nit display. It doesn't have the blacks something like an X300 has, but it's a little bit more field ready and cheaper. So it was easier on the pocketbook for the producers. And I didn't find that I was that worried about the toe in general. I was always looking at the highlights, particularly in contrasty situations. So the way that we had the LUTs built, especially in the black and white version, was um, when the monitor clipped, the waveform clipped, and the sensor, the camera told us we were clipped. So I knew empirically that if there wasn't detail on the monitor, there wasn't detail on the sensor, which was incredibly empowering as a DP. I really understood where the exposure curve was, and I could work quite comfortably in the midtones and in the shadows, knowing that I had all that room up top. And so And it's true. I mean, I think as much as we want to romanticize the light meter and romanticize the mysticism of it, we all work off the monitor, and David Fincher definitely does. And the confidence it brings him to look at the monitor and feel like it's extremely close to the image that he's going to see when Eric pulls it up in the suite, I think is really important. Has become very important for our process.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, it's so well said, and I think great advice for everyone out there who's can afford some sort of on-set HDR monitoring to work with. That it is a huge help. I'm struck by so many things about the image in this movie, about the detail you guys were able to maintain in the blacks, and in the shadows, and the overall contrast, and some really fun things like the day for night shots and the use of lens flares. I mean, jump in on any of these topics, all three of you, because I just think that the movie is it's just such a beautiful composition, and in Dolby Vision just helps bring it alive, right? It helps accentuate and see that. Jump in.
I would say that for Fincher, the first Dolby Vision project we did was Mindhunter, and in terms of the range of what HDR is capable of, he was very conservative on Mindhunter, and and what I learned was that he was one of his biggest things that he wants to control in a grading suite is saturation. He absolutely abhors garish colors, and he likes to have a palette that has a nice, how would you call it, a controlled specified a range that is something akin to like a film stock or something that really has or a LUT that really imparts something, right? But it's his own vision of that.
A curated set of colors.
Pure, exactly right. Give it a look. So the thing about the HDR for Mindhunter is that or for Mank rather, is that if you take saturation out of the equation, that none of that was an issue. And David actually was totally willing to go to right up to 1,000 nits and really play with the whole range, right? So what a pleasure that was, because we have 14 stops of latitude in every EXR that I'm grading, and then David is an absolute nut when it comes to an Ansel Adams zone system on every frame, and so that's what it was for me, is dodge and burn, and just really, to his taste, to always know that whatever he calls out, and he calls out just loads of things in every shot that especially because our approach is to take a wide shot, grade it, as a master shot, and then time everything off of that. And in the master shots, and invariably, there's like everything behind you, that, okay, I want that, that statue back there, or that armchair back there needs to have the same values in the next, cut, the next shot that you cut with. And so it was really like a fun sort of game like that for me.
So, Eric, if you were to say, what was the average nit level on Mindhunter versus Mank?
We were right around 250 maybe, in terms of 250. I'm not talking about the peaks, the like light sources, light bulbs, whatever, would be 600 in Mank, but it was maybe 550. I'm sorry, in Mindhunter, maybe 500. The speed limit was, but he liked to keep like something bright, like a window, maybe around 300 nits, or in Mindhunter.
Uh-huh.
Whereas in Mank, it was kind of like just, however, the once you put the ODT on there for 1,000 nits, it's really whatever the ODT was giving us out of the box was kind of like, if it came out that way, that's kind of how it is, and he was much less saying like, wow, that's way too bright or contrasty. It was really more fine tuning from the start.
We were also lighting with a lot more contrast. We had the movie is so different. I mean, if you look at Mindhunter, it's very muted tonal. Tonally, it's a very muted show in general. It's I mean, from the script all the way through the visuals, and Mank is a much different type of image from the onset. So I think it invites that in a way that we hadn't worked with before.
Yeah, and to your point, Eric Weidt, about sort of the Ansel Adams, I literally think you could pick so many frames from this movie, and they would be Ansel Adams portraits of light and light through the windows, like you're talking about, or there's the shot of over Orson's shoulder of you don't really see his face yet in the beginning, and you see the bulbs of his mirror, and it feels like magical, like a magical photograph of Hollywood, of old Hollywood. And so I was completely stunned by, obviously there are beautiful, incredible shots in Mindhunter that are pieces of art, and the camera work and there's no shaky cam in the vocabulary, right? It's everything is perfectly crafted. And so Erik Messerschmidt, talk a little bit about the lens flare look and how that was purposeful.
Talk about group effort. They, we we had done a really extensive series of lens tests. I had done I projected when you say projected, you take the lenses and you put the lenses on a projector, and it projects a focus screen up, and you can evaluate resolution and distortion, barrel distortion, and chromatic aberration and spherical aberration. And I went to Panavision, I went to Kesel camera, and I evaluated 24 different sets of lenses. And mostly what we were looking for was sharpness, and sharpness at very deep f-stops. And turns out, to no surprise, the most modern lenses are in fact the sharpest. But modern lenses also, unfortunately, don't flare particularly well. In fact, it's very difficult to get them to flare, and it's very difficult to get them to flare in the style of the sort of simple lenses of the 1940s. Modern lenses have multiple groups of optics that are managing things like aberration and astigmatism and stuff. The lenses of the 1940s have just 3 or 4 pieces of glass, and so they have lots of flare characteristics that modern lenses do not have. And we're quite interested in these sort of halation flares that lenses of the period produce, and even vintage lenses from the 50s and 60s that we use now, to achieve certain effects don't give those effects. So we had pulled a series of references, and I sent some to Peter and Eric and to David, and then David had some ideas, and so all the lenses have been art directed by Peter's team after the fact, which has been one of the joys of my time on the movie, was like getting those and seeing, maybe that could be a little bit bigger, and talking to Fincher about it, and what if this just striated a little bit more, and let's go bigger here. And that was really fun. But it's all, it's all trickery. None of that is was actually captured that way, which is kind of the way we like it.
The lens flares is one of the many ways that I refer to David painting in post, where he's adding flares, and we have an effect shot, and once the effects is done, he would look at, there's a shot in there where he finished this one matte painting, which is when Mank is just talking to Charles Leder and then walking away, and there was a blank spot in the frame. He says, you know what, this street right here just needs a manhole cover. And so we put a manhole cover in. So this is stuff that all happens, after the fact. And the lens flare thing is something that we've been doing actually since Panic Room, of all things. But I think that this movie is our most successful. It's the most thorough. It's the most researched. It's the most logical. Whereas the other ones were, if you look at the other ones, there's a little bit of inconsistency. It's like, why does that have a flare and that doesn't? But I think on Mank, we really put the light on it, and I think we did it as well as it's been done so far in our world.
So I have to ask then, so when we're in the ranch and Mank's in bed, and or wherever there's God rays sort of streaming through windows, is that the same thing?
Well, that's a mix. A lot of it is Eric, and then in fact there's one shot where Eric and his team on the set purposely didn't put a ray coming in the door because we needed to match something out the door, but he did on the window. And so there's a little mix, and sometimes it's Eric Weidt enhancing what Erik Messerschmidt did. So that's a little bit more of a mixed bag.
There's a shot in the movie where it's the Irving Thalberg funeral, and that set was one where we wanted these dramatic shafts of light coming in, and we had to, for a variety of reasons, we had to shoot it from the side of the room where there were in fact no windows. So we shot it and we put some theatrical lights up in the frame and filled the room with smoke and projected shafts of light through the smoke, and then added the windows later.
Well, so that actually brings up a question then, I think probably be one of my last sort of specific shooting questions is, in terms of a DP learning to make the shift from the world of SDR into, working in HDR or planning and prepping for it and then executing, are there practical lighting tips, especially practical effects or on-set lights that change your way of thinking or shooting?
No, I just think it simplifies it. I mean, I think finishing an HDR and monitoring an SDR it's like shooting film and exposing it off the video tap. It's, you're looking through this, you're looking at a very narrow band of and a much different dynamic range than what the sensor is actually capturing. So you're lighting your balance, and for me it's all about balance. It's not even really about exposure, it's about the distribution of exposures in the frame. So the brightness of the practicals versus the amount of fill you use, or etc. So it has been, for me, the most profound part of it has been learning that I actually can do less, that I need less. And if we need to add contrast, it's better done with Eric. He can do it with much more nuance than I can on the set. I end up bringing in black fabric all over the place, and or I end up adding a bunch of fill light that then we get rid of later. For me, it's just been it's completely simplified my entire process. And maybe it's just because I'm a little bit neurotic and I have to see it, but it's definitely changed things and it's made me appreciate it's made me appreciate giving the sensor more light and the value of that. I used to think much differently about it. I used to kind of embrace the kind of romantic idea of dramatic underexposure and very thin negative, and I have gone the other way, feeling like it's much better to expose to the right, so to speak, and fill the sensor up and get as much color fidelity and saturation in there as we can have, so that we can make those nuanced choices later when we're not stressed about whether or not we need to go to lunch.
Right. That's amazing. And so, Peter and Eric Weidt, in terms of, is this the second project that you guys chose in ACE's workflow, or was there one before Mindhunter Season 2?
The ACES workflow, I mean, it depends if you're referring to the ACES color spaces or you're talking about just the workflow of having an ODT and RRT. No, that was started right from the first season of Mindhunter. So this would be the third sort of project. Yes, Mindhunter is season 1, then Mindhunter season 2, then Mank, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is just
And
brilliant.
It works really well for you and the team, correct?
Oh, for me, from the start, it was like it was a godsend. I mean, the idea of having an RRT, that is then you can repurpose, for a particular output device. Every the whole the scene referred source media, and then the working space, the RRT, and then the ODT for me is such a clean and easily digested setup, and it really makes things um, um, easy to understand. Um, uh, speaking of which, I hope you guys are coming out with your 48 nit um, target display,
For
your
trims,
display
for
target, right?
cinema trims, yes.
Yeah.
It's on the roadmap to be out this year. Yes.
Okay, good. This year. All right. Well,
Yes.
we can't wait because that's kind of like it makes it's basically it's a one-stop shop. You grade in an HDR. I was talking to one of your colorists,
Greg
Greg.
Hamlin, right?
Yeah, Greg Hamlin, and he was telling me that some people make the choice to actually grade in SDR, even though they know that later they're going to have to do an HDR version. And to me, that's so hard to understand. Because the idea of like, well, you always want to stay as much as you can at any step in the process in the most highly dynamic, you know, world, let's say. So if you have an HDR monitor and you're only grading for SDR, I would still grade in HDR.
I think that's a transition in our technology. It's a learning thing, because the same thing's happening in sound with Atmos coming out. People were mixing, 5.1, 7.1, and then doing Atmos. And finally, we're now reaching the point there where, no, you start with Atmos and then you down convert. And so you're saying the same thing, and we'll get there. In 5 years, nobody will start with SD. Everybody
Yeah.
will be in HD,
Mhm.
HDR, and go the other way.
We're doing HDR dailies on my movie right now. We're doing
Oh, you
HDR
are?
dailies. Yeah, and we have the transforms really tailored now. We're waiting for Dolby Vision to be implemented in dailies. We're hopeful to try and figure out a way to make that work, but at the moment we have transforms built, and the SDR emulations of the HDR dailies are really good.
How
And
are
that's
you
been
watching them? How are you watching the
on
dailies?
an iPad Pro
And through what platform?
through Frame.io.
Frame.io?
Yeah,
Okay.
we're doing a beta test through them, and so we're watching HDR dailies, and it's spectacular.
And is somebody like, I don't know, like say a studio exec who probably doesn't have an HDR display, how do they sing dailies?
The way it
Do you know?
works, so in the app it pops up, and if you have an HDR capable device, the HDR content is available and it's tagged. And it's interesting because in the preview, the thumbnail, it's log, and the app actually applies the transform. If you're on an iPad Pro, somehow it's calculating what the nit value of it's like a Dolby Vision, I guess, basically. But the SDR content is available as well. So if you want to, so I can toggle back and forth, and I can look and see if the LUTs are tracking properly, but it's been helpful for me because a lot of the stuff is day interior, and we're looking at highlights and stuff, and it's been pretty interesting. But it's been a bit of a learning curve too, because we're trying to get initially our color spaces were not stuff was getting encoded in the wrong color space. Anyway, it's a long story, but it's been cool.
So
Yeah.
in terms of Mank, what was it was the PIX system, and what was the dailies workflow there?
We had made some LUTs. Basically on set, Eric has he's monitoring. There's a couple of one or two HDR monitors, but the rest of the monitors on the set for the focus pullers and whatnot are SDR monitors. So we had two sets of LUTs, and then so for HDR for the dailies. We just had the Next Lab, the Photocam Next Lab applying our SDR versions of those LUTs. We also had a day for night LUT, which was fun to kind of guess how to translate for dailies at least to this stuff that was shot in bright daylight. Amazing.
Yeah, and to add to that, we're actually blessed because we actually keep Eric Weidt around during production. And so what that means is if Messerschmidt or Fincher shoot something and they go, I don't know how this is going to feel, and we'll go, okay, we'll just send it over to Eric Weidt, and he'll grade it, and maybe he'll even bracket it for you, and then we send that off, or they come in and look at it with him, whatever. So it's this great situation where they can get really high level feedback very quickly.
Yeah, and in the prep too. In the prep, it was
Yeah.
incredibly helpful. I mean, building the
Yeah.
LUTs and through the whole testing process and having access to Eric and I mean, just creatively, bouncing ideas. I mean, the three of us
Right.
were constantly, working stuff out.
That's
We
great.
we we have great respect for tests. We really do. Like we don't discourage them at all.
Yeah. And I think that's a great comment. I mean, Peter, I was going to ask you sort of separately from a producer standpoint and being responsible for the pipeline of post-production, et cetera. What would you tell other producers to be to move? You know, you said 5 years from now you think HDR will be embraced in the standard.
Hmm.
You know, as people are embarking on this journey or concerned or don't know what they don't know, what would you say from a producer standpoint?
Well, okay. So from my own experience, and I can't remember how many years ago it was. It was Dolby contacted me and asked me to come. They wanted to show me this HDR, and I went into Burbank and met with Bill Villarreal. And I've always, as there have been these resolution wars over the years with the cameras. I said, I don't want more resolution. I want more bit depth first. And then finally, when I finally saw HDR, I'm like, that's it right there. The first time I looked at HDR, I swear it looked 3D to me without any 3D glasses. And just like I like the Dolby cinemas, if I can see a movie there, that's where I'm going to go see it, in there because of the, blacks hitting zero and all that. And so, part of that's a long way of answering, saying like, look, the goal here is to present it in its literally in its best light, and then try to get that to spread into all the different departments, so that over time, your next project should look better than the one you did before. Always, always, always. Right now, I'm in the middle of budgeting what we hope is our next movie, and in terms of what Eric Messerschmidt was just saying about dailies. There's a discussion now about whether we should have HDR in the edit room, because that's now on the table. And these new Macs that came out have huge amount of increase in rendering power and everything. So all these other things start to become more possible and not necessarily more expensive. That's the thing, is that like something shows up and then people immediately think like, oh, that's going to double the price. And in fact, if anything, with HDR and these really sensitive sensors, you need less lighting equipment, not more.
For sure. For
And
sure.
so it's going the other
Absolutely.
way.
That's amazing. And then, you know, Eric Weidt, as we move to sort of the discussion about color, I was so fascinated to see your baselight projects for Mindhunter, and the chromatic aberrations and the layers of effects and things that you sort of had to navigate. Tell us about your baselight system and your workflow and setup for Mank.
Well, it's the same. I mean, it's very straightforward. Talking about HDR versus what's new about for people who have never used it. There's really nothing different. You just need an HDR monitor. That's all. Because you're already your working space on a baseline is it's DPX or EXR, but you have all this latitude there that you've come all these years not being able to see at the same time on one monitor. You'd have to select the highlights and bring them down in order to bring those into the dynamic range of what you've already exposed in the midtones. And but you're seeing a lot more. And but it's the bulk of the work. And there's so much work on Mank, for with someone like David, because Eric was saying, the shooting with the sharpest lenses available to mankind, and then David is going to take this. He wants to take that material and make something that has this patina of that goes back all the way to the 40s, and to be able to choose what part of that whole trajectory, that whole 60 years or 75 years ago, I don't know when that was, but and to choose what he likes about the 40s versus what he wants to retain. I mean, he did retain a 2.2 aspect ratio, and then so what he tried to do was to soften the edges of the frame, do this black blooming, which is These are artifacts that used to happen that we want to retain. We just want to refer to them, right? We don't want them to overwhelm the image and to actually degrade the image. We want to just choose what we like. And so there's a lot of choices being made all the time. And David is just he's the wizard, in the room that, that is just going to fire all these things at you, when it fades to black. I want it to start destroying, I want to see the optical effects in there that they used to have. And so we're recreated. They did Eric did some of that in camera on some of the shots where you close down the iris manually, I guess, or I don't know how you did.
We did some theatrical lighting fades actually, like cues, where we fade the lights out, and we fade the lights out at different different rates. So some lights linger longer than others, like you might on a stage production.
Yeah, and those look amazing. So my challenge was David coming along and saying, "Hey, they didn't do it on this particular shot, but let's try to do it anyways, okay?"
Right.
And so thankfully, I did have these amazing shots that were done like that on set with the practical lighting that I could refer to, and then I would try to recreate a digital version of that in the base light, using as many layers as needed. I mean, we add a camera, we had a gate weave, but just the right amount. We have all these different. We chose, we tested live grain, which is a sampled, it's a system that has all these samples of real film stocks as grain possibilities. But we went with the Baselight's internal procedural grain because it's key frameable. I mean, we're doing that much. I mean, you name it. If there's choices to be made, David wants to explore them.
Yeah, and so was a lot of the film, like for instance, the reel change dots in the upper right-hand corner, was that added as VFX, or was that all just layers on your base light?
That was those were VFX layers that I did composite in Baselight. As a matter of fact, we had this whole discussion because you can composite in Baselight. Actually, you can take multiple shots, and if they have alpha channels, you can superimpose them. And so there's benefits to that, and there's disadvantages because we actually have shots where we've got 3 or 4 composite, we've got titles coming over fades, coming over those dots those changeover marks. There's so much going on, so sometimes it's like, hey, I'm just a colorist, guys, like can you not do this composite yourself and just give me the final product, please? Thank you. And they're like, no, because then we need to be able to dose the level of the titles coming over, and blah, blah, blah. You are
definitely not just a colorist. That cannot be. You should have like a cape or something too with you. So
I'd love to have Orson Welles cape.
Right on.
Right,
yeah,
that one
great,
shot.
Yeah.
That shot, Eric, I love that shot. It's just.
Oh, him walking down the hallway. Yeah, that was a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, you know who it is. I mean, there's no question who's coming down that hallway.
Yeah. Wait, that was, that's funny. It's about that shot. There was a big debate about that because that was one of the shots that we were going to, because it was a long hallway. Initially, we were like, we're going to do this very deep focus. And that was a bit of a game time decision, actually. We looked at it, we're like, God, maybe we should look at this at a T2 and just be focused on Mank. And of course, in retrospect, it was an obvious choice. But initially, that's not how we lit it, and that's not how we intended to shoot it. It was just one of those things where we knew.
Yeah, with the story point of him being drugged up and, banged up, and it's perfect to be completely blurred and out of it for that whole entry of Orson Welles. It's fantastic. Can I get a still frame? Will you guys send me a still of that one? I'd like
you can have, yeah.
Awesome. So now talk to us about the process of, Dolby Vision, where you run the analysis and do the SDR trim pass, and I know you were still using CM 2.9 for Mank.
Yeah.
But just give us your impressions of the whole Dolby Vision workflow.
For me, there's never, I mean, there's never been anything simpler. I would say a good 75% of my shots, um, I do the analysis. I basically lift the blacks a tiny bit, and that's it. And I'm pretty much done for about 75% of the shots. And then, others I just want to go in and kind of push the midtones up and bring the highlights down, or play the gamma off the gain or whatnot, just to find a better balance in there. But it's not something I lose sleep over. It's very straightforward. If you need a little bit more detail in the highlights, you can bring your gain trim down. I've played with the 4.0 the new 4.0 tools. They are just brilliant. I mean, you guys have really addressed every single thing and more, I think, than people were asking you for. The lift gamma gains are much more, how do you call it, DI like. I love the chroma weight, especially. That's brilliant for a color movie. That'll be amazing.
I sort of envision the secondary trims where you can grab hue or saturation being
Yes.
important for a Fincher SDR. That
Oh
seems
yeah. I mean, and you've got all the individual colors in there too in the secondaries in 4.0. So it's just brilliant. And also highlight detail too, which I think is really great. Um, So I can't wait. We did not do like you said, Mindhunter or Mank in 2.9, but definitely the next project for me. I'm going to push for that
for
because
4.0. Okay, yeah.
yeah, oh yeah, for
And then
sure.
and then Eric Messerschmidt, as you see your image in SDR, how do you feel the Dolby Vision process and workflow gets you what you're looking for?
I think well, Dolby Vision gives me a lot of security because I mean, we always have anxiety about how our work is viewed, and um, I mean, even in the theatrical release world, in a film print world, the likelihood of two film prints looking close to the original answer print that you looked at is extremely low. And for the first time, I feel like in the Dolby Vision environment, um, that's not so much the worry anymore. Um, you know, I, on a 600 nit or 800 nit LG display in Dolby Vision, in my opinion, it probably looks the best, or it looks the closest to what we all would want people to view it in. Um, but SDR, Dolby Vision, encoded image at a lower threshold, it looks great, and it makes me feel better, more confident that people are appreciating it the way it was intended, and it's eased up the anxiety just a little bit.
Mhm. In base, I will add, Tom, that in Baselight, remember I was talking about these fades where all this stuff was supposed to happen, and it is happening in Mank, where the grain is increasing, the blacks are crushing, the highlights are blowing out, um, and a lot. I'm keyframing all of these in my layers in on the Baselight. Well, it turns out that the Dolby Vision trim tools are keyframeable as well in Baselight, and I used that a lot during those fades, believe it or not, because there was so much going on, and sometimes it didn't come out perfectly because there's like 80 layers above the analysis, but to be able to keyframe those was just a godsend, really. To be able to go down to a perfect black and to boost during the fade to see to be able to catch that one moment that says optical, is really cool.
One of my, you know, amazing scenes that I really think throws back to that era, right, is the idea of shooting the day for night stuff outside in the gardens of San Simeon. So maybe you guys could walk us through how fun that was to do.
I would ask Eric. Why? Okay, why did you make that choice, first of all, to shoot day from?
It was, I was shooting in Africa. I was doing this TV show called Raised by Wolves, and we were doing all our night work day for night. And whenever I'm not shooting with Fincher, I send him stills of what I'm doing. And I was like, hey, look at this, look at this, look what we're doing here. Um, and we were chatting about this day for night work, and he said, oh, that's interesting, that's beautiful, that's kind of cool. And then when Mank came up, he was scouting and he was looking at the locations, and um, the locations they had found that he liked were Huntington Gardens in Pasadena, California, and the backyard of a mansion in San Marino, um, and both of which were perfect uh, for what he wanted to do in terms of the digital animals and the amount of real estate we had to cover, and the scope that he wanted the audience to appreciate. But they were also incredibly logistically challenging to light. We didn't really have access. Um, we were shooting sort of at the tail end of the summer, where we would have wanted a slightly longer night. If we were going to shoot it night for night, it would have been very expensive. Um, and he said, well, God, what if we just did it day for night, like you did? And I was like, okay, that's an interesting idea. And of course, that's exactly what they would have done in 1940 in that scenario. Um, and so we went back and we looked at it with respect to this. We had been scouting it as if we were lighting it initially, and of course that by the time we made that decision, we then had to take into account the position of the sun. Um, we looked at the position of the sun, and we knew we had to, because we wanted it either backlit or side lit, so we knew we had to get this shot at this time of the day and this shot at this time of the day, and then we did a whole series of tests. And in the early days of film, what one would have done is underexpose the film, um, and with the help of some filtration, and add artificial fill. And I knew from my experience, both with Fincher but also on the TV series, that there was no added value of underexposing the camera. That actually what we should do is build a LUT, a viewing LUT. Which basically is just helping me judge fill values, knowing that there is plenty of detail in there for Eric to work with, so he can dodge areas of foliage, and he can push down foreground, and fully aware that those things we would have to do in order for it to be believable. So what we're getting is a really thick, rich negative if you were to look at it ungraded, it would look crazy because it was super bright, and there was lots of artificial fill on the actors, way more than you would if you were doing a traditional day exterior. But then when it's all brought down through the help of the viewing LUT that we built, and we actually built a couple versions. We built sort of a softer curve for overcast viewing, and then we built sort of steeper curve for sunny viewing. We would bring in that fill light, and it would approximate roughly the gamma that we thought Eric would be working with in the grade, and then he was able to work with it from there.
And Eric Weidt, tell us your fun experience.
Well, yeah, it's like you say, if you just happen to turn off all your layers in HDR, 1008 HDR, with the original footage, it's like you get blasted with this super bright daylight. Um, that was fun. Yeah, every single zone in there. We're treating, and a lot when they walk by these, some cave, the cages with the monkeys. That was added by ILM, the cage and the monkeys. I anticipated, of course, David's going to ask for, a little bit here, a little bit. So I asked for alpha channels for everything, right? And so never ask ILM for alpha channels for everything, because they will give you alpha channels for everything. And, they'll give you an EXR that's like 3 terabytes, just that shot, and these are long, this is a walk and talks. These are long shots. So, but at the end of the day, I was able to say that monkey, up and down, just dose everything kind of perfectly. So that was super fun.
I would just say I came out of the experience. I don't know about Eric, but I came out of the experience not really interested in shooting color again. I was so thrilled with it. I didn't miss it at all. I was like, oh great, what's the next black and white movie we get to do? Because it was so much fun and challenging in a way that I certainly for me I hadn't experienced before. So I loved the entire process of it.
I was worried at first about not being able to pull keys on colors, you know, like, ooh, I felt like, oh, I'm going to be all naked, like, especially because it's like, David has such specific comments sometimes that it's just like, okay, am I going to take the time to write an email, to do screenshots, and to tell my post supervisor that this needs to be rotoscoped so that I can address, just the little light on the side of the face when he turns, or am I just going to take it, upon myself? I'm going to, I'll spend more time doing that, so I'm just going to do it myself. I'm just going to do the roto here, and so you have, overlapping things are possible these days. Where was I going with this? I don't really know.
Just about your experience with black and white, and would you do it
Yeah,
again?
so and it turns out it was much less daunting than, you can pull color ranges, and then at the end of the day, you just say, I can't do this, this needs to be rotoscoped by somebody else. And I'm absolutely amazed at what, how the visual effects is able to work in black and white. I'm amazed at their work, frankly. With not having any green screens, it's, hats off to all the like Savage and all those companies that worked on Mank. Way is another one in Hollywood.
It's
Um,
it's an amazing piece of in this day and age to experience that kind of filmmaking in a classic way that is it just shows the breadth of what you guys are capable of as a team, and seeing Mindhunter and that look, and then going to this complete, you know it could absolutely sit and fit with the best movies of the 30s 40s, without a doubt. It's that kind of meticulous filmmaking, and so I'm just a huge fan of what you guys do, and again, I thank you for taking the time to chat with us on this. It's totally a privilege to work with you guys and to help you. And yes, we will get you those cinema trims. We'll
yes,
make that happen.
yeah, and I'd love to do a cinema pass at Mank, by the way, in Dolby Cinema, because
Let's do it.
you talk about like I mean, it was difficult for me to make a cinema pass, a traditional 48 nit. DCI. I mean, it was difficult after looking at HDR to go into that trim pass for that. So, I'd like to. I mean, that's the way of the future is Dolby Cinema for me. I mean, it's like once you've seen it and you know that it's there and it's out there, for a project like Mank, that's the holy grail, really, in terms of cinema.
Well, let's book because we'll have your 1000 nit image, we can do a 108 nit cinema trim for the Dolby
Mhm.
Cinema,
Mhm.
and then we can go right in and do a 48 nit trim, and let's have fun and see how that goes, because I think it's like you said, it's absolutely perfectly made for for Dolby
Mhm.
Cinema. I can't thank you guys enough. Again, the input, the feedback, the storytelling. I could listen to this all day long, and I'm sure you've got lives to lead, so we're gonna let you get back to that. But everybody, if you haven't seen Mank in Dolby Vision, check it out. As Erik Messerschmidt said, best viewed probably on an LG type OLED display. And again, thank you guys. You're absolutely fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
We're now moving from the pre-recorded piece with Eric, and Peter all the way to the live Q&A. So stay tuned for more. All right. Thank you for joining. Let's see if we can get Eric Weidt. There we go. Eric, let's hear your mic. Unmute for us.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, great. Peter, we know we got you.
Hey,
So in case you joined us a little late, unfortunately today, Erik Messerschmidt had something else come up at the last minute, and so we don't have him. But we're super excited to have these guys live because there's a lot of questions I think that both of you, are really targeted at your specialty. So we'll start with, in terms of color grading, there's some questions around your thoughts in comparing, a separate SDR grade after the HDR grade is complete, or vice versa, HDR versus starting with SDR versus the Dolby Vision derived trim. So I think you cover it in the webinar, but there is a question from Freddie on that.
Well, I'm trying to read what are your thoughts comparing a separate SDR grade after HDR is complete versus a Dolby Vision derived SDR trim? Well, the Dolby Vision SDR trimmed, I mean, you're basically you're held by the hand the whole way, and you don't really need to do much. I mean, you're not starting over. It's certainly possible. That's what I did, for example, in the P3 DCI P3 Cinema 48-nit Cinema version. I did not have an appropriate or a Dolby Vision 48-nit trim yet, so that's what I did for Cinema. I just switched the output, the ODT, to a traditional DCI P3 gamma, and went from there, and went scene by scene, and
did some trims.
But doing without not having to do that manually, or just having it much like within 90% of what I need already. It's just. And I go through the SDR trim on a regular basis because David does a lot of remote viewing of the work in progress. So right from the start, I have a working SDR trim based on the analysis of the shots that works for most of the show.
Cool. And then in terms of time, there was another question about how much time do you spend on the HDR grade and then allocating for the Dolby Vision trim?
It's probably 99% on the HDR grade. I mean, in terms of time, 98%. But
okay.
It's that straightforward, the SDR trim for me. I mean, I only spend time on areas where I know there's like clouds or whatnot, or there's really extremes, let's say, in the image. But your standard, I don't know, everything else is pretty straightforward.
And then Peter,
I'll add something.
Do you have a comment on time and budget?
What's that?
Do you have a comment towards that about timing and planning and budgeting for color grading?
We're in a very unique spot, which most people are going out to facilities to do this, and so they really do have to count their minutes. As I said in the piece, that we have Eric around the whole time. We do our DI in-house. We do testing in pre-production. We do testing throughout production. We do testing in post-production. Eric has some other talents that we take advantage of. He has 15 years of cosmetic work that he does that we like to take advantage of. But then we also do testing. In terms of that question about HDR versus SDR, there are a couple of cases where we're specifically concerned about the SDR, where we will do comps and bring them to Eric and look at him. In a specific scene where that happened is when you're looking from Mank's point of view in the bed out the door. Those were those shafts of light that we talked about earlier. Mm-hmm. It's very subtle out there. There is landscape out there, and that's a mat. The stage, the exterior of the house is in the real location where Citizen Kane got written, but the interior is a set. And so to put the very subtle level of set detail out there in HDR was pretty straightforward. To be able to convert that to SDR was very tricky. And so that was a situation where we did some comps and went and sat with Eric and looked at it, and then went back and forth a couple times.
And if you were budgeting, say, for a different project, would you consider that the Dolby Vision workflow is more efficient that way for you then?
doing the HDR 98% of the time.
And
Oh, for sure.
yeah, doing the HDR first, then doing the Dolby Vision workflow
Yes.
to derive it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Cool.
Among other things, it tells you what detail you have there. You know, if you start with the SDR, then there are all these questions like, well, do we have more detail out that window? And if you've done the HDR first, you already know the answer.
Interesting. I think we covered it in the webinar, but I'm struck by how much, you know, not to underestimate how much extra things Eric does beyond sort of just being a colorist, meaning the way you have to deal with reframing or comping or the added layers of, say, judder or, you know, gate weave or chromatic aberrations, things like that, I think are, you really are, you know, such a partner with, you know, Erik Messerschmidt in crafting the end image. So you do need a cape. I think that's for certain.
Well, that's much to credit. That's how Peter Mavromates and David Fincher designed their post process, is that they figured having the colorist closer to the editorial, closer to the we have a couple of our main visual effects people are in-house too. So there's very much a team thing going on in what we do. You know, I start early with Erik Messerschmidt as well. So I guess the closer you are,
there is some questions about testing and what types of testing and things that you guys do early on. Can you maybe describe a little bit more about that process?
Well, we tested the cameras. First of all, was it going to be color or black and white? You know, we quickly seized on black and white. I think it was because of they were faster cameras. I mean, if Eric was here, he could answer better, I'm sure. But the black and white was faster in terms of you know, light sensitivity. I don't know, it was just sexier. I don't know why. A monochrome, no debayer sensor, so that it was cleaner, I think, less grain. Which of course then we added grain back in because we're twisted. The kinds of testing, I think Eric tests a lot for individual light bulbs, you know, to see what kind of glow they give, you know, how the flares look, testing, of course, the LUTs.
We did some significant testing to create the black bloom look. That was a very key thing in pre-production, which was testing to make sure that Messerschmidt exposed in a manner that Eric Weidt could actually create this black bloom look that harkened back to prints of the 1930s.
And in terms of,
that's right. We tested
LUTs too. So I'm sure there was a lot of testing to get the LUTs correct, right?
Well, yeah, because Eric wanted to monitor in HDR, and to find a magic bullet LUT for HDR is, well, it's difficult because for an SDR LUT, because there's so much latitude going on in the HDR that you have to sort of choose where you want to be. It was just sort of trial and error. I mean, unfortunately, there's no quick Dolby Vision, you know, version of a dailies LUT. I mean, we thought about that, you know, but I don't think it really exists yet. Or I don't know if people are actually doing that. You know, Dolby Vision right in their dailies. Tom, have you heard of that?
It's there's some people working on it, but yeah, it's not currently the one that I think has it is called Moxion. They have sort of a iPad Pro dailies type workflow, but I think some of the other big ones are working on it. So in terms of LUTs, here's a question. Did you use LUTs made for the production and keep them in your final grade, or did you just have those in mind as you built the grade and did everything in Baselight color tools?
Right. Well, I did everything in Baselight. I did not use the LUTs in the final grade. No, but I know what I did in the LUTs, and so I could start actually the grade with that, you know, mathematical curve that I already did in Baselight. I made the LUT in Baselight anyways. So I had those as layers, for example. But no, it's really just to set the look, you know, to make sure that everything in dailies, you know, looked bloomed, and I mean the LUTs didn't do that. We had to have Photochem make a GLSL shader to simulate a look that I had found in Baselight with layers. So it was, you know, wasn't a scientific process there. It was just a creative sort of try to get the ballpark blooming, you know, into the dailies. And then yeah, we had separate HDR and SDR LUTs because Eric has 1 or 2 HDR monitors on set, and the rest are all SDR.
Okay. And then Peter, here's a question for you. It's from Joe. What information from on-set is crucial for you to translate to post in order to continue developing the look and color, and what is that process like?
Well, for look and color, that's really a question for Eric. In terms of stuff that I might handle, you know, it's always nice to have lens information for the VFX people and camera positioning. And I know there's great efforts between David and Red to get Red to capture more and more actual information about where that camera is, what angle it's tilted at, and that sort of thing. And it'll reduce a lot of the roto work if we have that kind of thing.
Yeah, so in other words,
yeah, I think he wants
more metadata from lenses and camera and on-set information in order to get through to post and have better results.
Yeah, and it's interesting because some of our vendors are very clever, and they sometimes track down information outside of our world. We had to replace all the skies in this one scene, and so our vendor actually, you know, went on Google, we gave him the location, he found the location, did the math on the sun positioning and everything like that, and you know, it's incredible, like the level of detail he's able to go on his own with other information that's out there, just knowing that we were at that place and laid out the set in this position at that time of the day. It's incredible.
That's great. Eric, you were going to say something?
I forgot what I was going to say. Yeah, no, but we use specifically for on Mindhunter, for example, we use the lens data because we had different spherical warpings on the image based on the focal length of the lens used. So that was very useful. And then David, I think on his in the future wants to be able to get if you're operating handheld, he wants to be able to have the image automatically stabilized for the horizon, but then the data, you know, follow through in metadata so that it can be undone, and so you can get to the original as shot or a sort of automatically generated stability on those lines.
Peter, in terms of VFX workflow, do your VFX houses, did they monitor in HDR, or how do they work?
Well, they got LUTs from Eric, and you know, I actually don't know the answer because it's so remote that I don't know whether they actually looked at it in HDR. But whenever we were concerned, this again goes back to having Eric around. Whenever we were concerned, we'd say, hey, you know, on this one shot, can you send us, you know, maybe 1 second of frames so that we can look at them in HDR? Where of anything where that probably was crucial is probably the dome ceilings that Way at Art Temple did in the San Simeon sets, where you start up in the ceiling and you crane down, because it's pretty dark on both those shots. Both those scenes are, you know, they're night interior, and you're basically up in the rafters where there's almost no light. And so that we would have looked at with Eric closely early in the process.
And so if you had notes that, hey, you're not seeing enough detail in the shadows, you know, do you see the industry, you know, with more affordable sort of HDR monitors getting there? Is that something you might, as you're budgeting and you're working with picking houses, you might make sure that they have one of those?
Yeah, and I would be shocked if they didn't already have it, because I would think that it would be of interest to them as well. You know, it makes their work better and easier to have that level of quality.
Okay.
It's incredible too. I mean, these monitors that are coming out are so much better than the professional monitors of 20 years ago. You know,
Yeah.
these are it's we don't talk in terms of professional monitors anymore. It's very interesting. It was like that was everything when I started, you know, in the 80s and 90s. It's like you had to have that $30,000 Sony monitor, and now you're having discussions about some high-end consumer, and we refer to prosumer, but it's a monitor that you can buy at Best Buy. You know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely some more exciting you know, revelations in that world of that I think would target the VFX people especially, right?
Yeah.
It's maybe not color critical enough for an Eric Weidt to work on, but it's for a VFX or a QC person, it's certainly great.
Yeah, and obviously it's really important for VFX people where if they're doing full CG shots,
Mm-hmm.
and they really have to know what they're creating there,
Yeah.
what it looks like.
And then Eric Weidt, was there in terms of working in black and white, were there things that you did differently in because it was black and white that you had to sort of change your normal workflow?
Change. Well, I didn't have access to chroma keys, so it was all luminance keys, which was a huge difference. So, and then I always had my last layer was a fully, you know, desaturate to down to 0 layer in case I inadvertently bumped one of the RGB knobs. You know, I wouldn't want one shot just having suddenly some random color in it, but not really. It's the exact same setup we used for Mindhunter, which was here we were on red eye PP2, you know, because it was shot on red monochrome cameras. And well, in this on Mank, I just ended up having just a lot of like cross-faded and keyframed elements in the grades for particularly when this optical look comes, you know, at the end of scenes when to reproduce the kind of black destruction that happens in an optical fade, you know, a period optical fade. I don't know if that.
Cool.
Essentially, no, I didn't change much.
2 more quick questions. And you know, I get the sense that Eric Weidt does have a lot of weight and on decisions. And so this question is from Pep. It says, do you believe that in the years